Today, we're talking about the philosophy of transformations, if you will, and then talking about how the semantic layer metrics are going to be the new frontier of transformations. But bear with me, I know all of y'all have already been hearing a lot about semantic layer, and so we're not going to bore you too much, but instead we're going to talk about the framing and then give you actually some tactical examples to bring back home, so that way you can think about how you can implement the semantic layer. So today, generally what we're talking about is I'm going to talk about the evolution of DBT transformations then and now, as well as exploring what does the new frontier look like. And then Andrew is going to talk about the tactical, so how did we approach this? And then we're going to talk about the wrap-up, our learnings, and give you some QR code resources for you to screenshot and take home. So what makes us qualified to even talk about this? Why should you listen to us? Well, my name is Erica Louie. Some folks call me Rick, call me Erica, whichever one. And I'm currently a senior analytics manager for our engineer product and design vertical. I was previously head of data at DBT Labs, as well as previously at BuzzFeed. But I also was a second employee at DBT Labs circa 2017. And so I've seen DBT through all of these phases, which is now for Andrew.
Yeah, so I'm Andrew. I've worked at DBT Labs coming close to 5 years now. Started on the professional services side, where I did consulting with some of our earliest DBT customers, which was a fun one. Some of them I saw at this Coalesce. I moved over to the analytics engineer team, working primarily for product, and then moved over now to a lead data analyst role. So what I get to do is complain about the models I jankily built and ask someone to fix them for me. No, I'm just kidding. Jokes aside, I've been using DBT since 2018 or kind of late 2017, and I've been a DBT fanboy since. My official title at both this presentation and my company.
And another thing is some of you might recognize us from Coalesce 2020 or 2021, where we had the same talk talking about metrics and how we version controlled metrics during a world when we did not have the semantic layer. That was 3 years ago. But now I feel like really solid around this time around. And we're going to explain why. So late stage transformations, evolution of transformations, a brief history, and an exciting horizon ahead. What does that mean? Well, first we're going to talk about the past, then we're going to talk about the present, and then looking ahead. So let's get started. So if you think about phases of capitalism, phases of transformations, first you kind of start off with mercantile. So knowledge as a scarce information. So during this era of data, there are no data teams. There are these explorers within the company. They have these insights for their teams. Knowledge is traded internally, but its access is restricted. And then we go over into industrial capitalism, or industrial transformations, if you will. Knowledge as production power. So the company starts to form specialized data teams. These teams are kind of like these factory operators processing raw data, turning it into insights. Data pipelines are kind of like assembly lines, where the goal is efficient production of insights. And then we have monopoly. Knowledge as a strategic control. So data teams expand. The organization begins to invest heavily into data infrastructure, advanced analytics. These teams evolve from simple reporting units to more strategic divisions. And like monopolies, they work to control proprietary data resources. They use advanced analytics to carve out competitive edge in the market, et cetera. And then 2016, Tristan comes out with this article, which you can scan that QR code if you want to read the article. It's from 2016, where when DBT started, we had this idea where analytics teams have a workflow problem, where they work in these isolated areas where knowledge is siloed. We have to grasp the nuances of data sets. We have different calculations of shared metrics and reduced decision speed, as well as reduced decision quality. And then so comes DBT. So originally, DBT started off as trying to empower data analysts, where we had these pain points of we're blocked by data engineers, We have isolated work and knowledge. There's query sprawl in all these different areas. Which one is the right one? Like, oh no, this data analyst left 2 years ago. We have no idea what this query is. So the solution here was, well, let's think about SQL as code. Less reliant on data engineers, more collaboration across data analysts. Your DAG becomes how knowledge flows through your business, and that ownership within the modern data stack TM. So how do we then go from then this monopolized knowledge, think about knowledge as capital, to then knowledge as a globalized commodity within your organization? Which brings us to the present. So now, in the State of Analytics Engineering report, we're seeing that data practitioners feel like they have a handle on data transformations. Through the community, everyone's been saying, yeah, we solved transformations, we did it. There are over 2,200 analytics engineering jobs in the US alone. Our DBT project on our data team actually has over 1,300 models. But did we really solve transformations? So if you think about this, we're now at these two phases that we had just run over, where, again, think about knowledge as capital, where we went from a team-managed phase where knowledge as a governed resource. So we had this emergence of the analytics engineers to help govern these DBT models and shape the business logic. We had companies come to invest in data management policies and data quality assurance. Teams now focus not only on the extraction of insights, but also regulating how data flows through the organization. And then we're now over into this neoliberal metaphor, where knowledge as an organizational commodity. So at this stage, knowledge and data have become organizational commodities, right? Where it's like the analytics engineers have all this knowledge of these DBT models. 1,300 DBT models containing organizational knowledge. We have this rise of decentralized data teams, as well as self-serve analytics occurring within this phase. So knowledge is commodified and shared within the organization, much like the free flow of capital in markets today. But let's talk about the State of Analytics Engineering report. So if we are believing that transformations have been solved, and we believe in the enablement of data teams as being the primary measure of success, if we believe that we want to be respected, including in decisions that impact our work, if we want to increase the trust in data in our data teams, and if we want to reduce the cost of producing insights. And a lot of y'all have said the most challenging parts of preparing your analysts, or preparing data for your analysis today, is poor data quality, is poor stakeholder data literacy, and ambiguous data ownership. These are all still problems that we experience today. So I want to make this argument here that DBT models are a building block for transformations, but it isn't the whole pie. So the present, let's talk about right now, today. Analytics engineers today really care about the models that represent the nomenclature of our business. How can I optimize and ensure quality? These are what we look at as analytics engineers. But for data analysts, what they really care about is how do we define this metric? Which model should I use? Have these metric definitions changed? And these are some things that they look at. Versus for our stakeholders, the folks that help us figure out if we're successful or not, they want to care about, well, what about revenue? Did we reach our revenue targets? How many accounts had adopted our feature? And what was the click-through rate for our campaign? They don't look at models. They look at metrics. And so some would say then that if we think about this, holdings of data knowledge today has kind of created this problem for us, where the idea of trickle-down data economics did not work. We have all these DBT models. We have solved how to do this thing. But there's no structure in place to to redistribute the data to make its way down to help enable our data analysts, to help enable our stakeholders. And so I would say then that the next stage of transformations is sharing the wealth. So in this current phase, we had solved problems for data teams. We have built these DBT models to reflect our business operations, to reflect this knowledge. And in the end, if you think about it, all DBT models are meant to help build metrics, to measure your business. And so I'm arguing here that there's a disconnect between our models and the metrics that they serve. Stakeholders, again, they see metrics. They do not see models. So we need to further collaborate with our data analysts and with our stakeholders. So looking ahead, codifying metrics, I'm arguing here, is the next stage of transformations. That's right. I don't need to say anything else here. So misalignment of metrics erodes trust. It confuses data ownership. It takes much longer time for insights. And it also makes it more difficult to enable data teams. And we've experienced this too. We've seen our CFO ask this question about seat utilization. We've had our VP of product also ask us around what's the definition of active. We've seen other teams trying to align on the definition of what is activated. And even I am too guilty of this, of trying to figure out what is the definition of revenue, and had 51 replies within the data team. So how did we do this? How are we investing in the semantic layer, and what has it solved for us?
Thanks, Rick. So this is going to be a case study and deep dive on how we tried to implement it in DBT Labs, in our data team. Look at this more as a skeleton, a framework of how you could kickstart your own projects internally, and not so much an implementation guide. We still highly recommend everyone visit the docs. I think they're much better than where we started 12 months ago already, and will continue to get better because we're all in this, making this better just day by day. So how did we do it? At the thesis of everything, we think it's best for you to center your implementation around a key project, and more importantly than a key project, a key stakeholder who's willing to be in the room and have these conversations with you all. We're going to go through the stages in a hot second, but a large, vast majority of this will center around that second piece, more so than even that first piece. It's good to have a good baseline of what you're all in the room going and what you're going to be doing. It's more important that you have another person in that room to be there along with you for that ride. So this is what we did. We built this EPD overview report. We do have unicorns and rocket ships. Those are actual numbers, not scrubbed. Why this project? We wanted to create a clear report for blessed metrics where we need to be correct most, if not all the time. This was largely inspired by our EPD organization wanting to have a centralized place for us to do bi-weekly reporting and tell the business how we're performing. We found this as an opportunity to get a bunch of disparate dashboards and metrics all in one place as a one-stop shop for upper management, and also to make it easy for people to kind of backtrack what they hear from the newsletter and get back to those same numbers. Who was our stakeholder in this case? EPD senior leadership was a big driver on this, and every single product manager at some point got 1 million DMs from our team confirming if our assumptions were correct. And they were very happy to be in the room with us. So here's a rough skeleton. It doesn't look anything special. Plan, validate, build, iterate, and develop best practices. You either get them from a consulting manual, from a consultant that you hired with many zeros, or you get it from a random Google search. But I'm going to show you why this how we implemented this scaffold, but more importantly, step 2 and 3 are usually flipped. You often see a build stage before a validate stage. We'll show you why we think this pays you dividends into the future. So for stage 1, plan. This lays the foundation for everything. I would argue this is the most important, and you will spend the vast majority of your time. Don't underestimate how much this planning phase takes. If you have practices in your business where you have to plan maybe double the amount of time you thought it would take, plan maybe 10 times. This thing will be an ongoing process, but the faster you get through it, or the more you are aware that this is going to take much longer, everything else just speeds up down. So what do we argue for plan, or how do we recommend you do your plan stage? One, we recommend developing a catalog of metrics, and then next, identifying entities. How do we think about this kind of zoomed out? We think of all metrics at some point being some sort of verb, some sort of action that you are measuring that is then colored and augmented with nouns or context, or in this case, your entities. We'll show you a quick example of how this became very beneficial for us down the road. But here's just a quick laundry list of some properties that we think are important for you to gather in this early planning stage. You'll probably have a table in Notion database. You might have a Jira ticket somewhere where you start filling these pieces of information out. But generally, you can kind of use this as your building blocks and then build your own versions of this as you go. What's going to be our example for the rest of this talk? We had a metric called seat utilization percentage. Many of you here who are users of dbt Cloud know that basically most of you are primarily billed on a seat or purchase seat. And so we care about it deeply to make sure that people are utilizing the seats. And it's a very good indicator of if the things we're shipping are good, then people are willing to come back and continue to use those seats. Now, seat utilization isn't a great or easy thing to measure because it can mean many different things to many different places. And we have a dbt product where you can gain value by never logging in, because if you set your jobs right and you do the right things, you might not need to log in. And so there's a lot of complexity around what utilization means in our business. So I'll walk you all through an example of that calculation definition we did. Utilization for us today is active users over assigned seats. That in and of itself came from many iterations, and some of these still kind of live in some form of our world today. But we're doing our best to kind of scrub the rest. Does it mean that active users over purchase is not important? No, actually, that does matter. We just have to call it something else. We're not going to call it utilization. As well as the fact that this is a compounded metric. So active users is another metric in and of itself. Assigned seats is another active metric in and of itself. So for active users, in this case, we're saying for this example, we're just looking at login. But really, this went through another series of iteration as well to make sure we're tracking the right thing and we care about what it is. All of this, again, happened with the same people that I said in the beginning. Make sure they're in the room, they're excited to have these conversations, are willing to at least go toe-to-toe to understand what we really care about as a business. And then assigned seats, to cut the long story short, went through the same thing. And in our case, it's just any user with a paid seat. Then we go on to entities. The thing that I like most when we talk about entities is people don't often think of this as the next logical thing to sit down and do. You don't ask for entities usually from your stakeholder. You ask for the key metric that they care about. Like, what's the action that you want to measure and benchmark against? What you do as a data team next is make sure you understand what are the underlying entities that exist within that metric so that you can plan ahead for yourselves and kind of find similarities and connections. So if you develop another metric in the future, like, for example, maybe dbt users invoking dbt or running dbt in a development context, you'll know that you'll have the same user entity, and those properties might exist. For us, looking at entities became a really big unlock because many of our metrics forget that we have that middle section with the question mark, which is employee. Many of our dbt Labs teammates are in the product day in and day out, whether they're part of the selling process, whether they're part of a consulting engagement, and also are doing and running interactions on your accounts. And having consistent entities that you already plan for in advance after you've collected your metrics reminds you that you might have forgotten a key little filter that needs to appear in most, if not all, of your metrics. So this is a good way to standardize, find commonalities, bring them together so that in the planning phase alone, you reduce a lot of the repeat work that has to happen. It also helps bring the conversations back to the stakeholders who willingly gave their time up to have these conversations where, oh, have you thought about if it matters if they have a paid seat or not? Or, oh, does it matter if their plan tier happens at a certain stage? All of those kind of get easier as you start to develop more consistent convention around entities. Entities are also a place where people get very intimidated early on, which is like, how do we imagine the universe of functionality and purposes that people use these entities for? Well, you don't have to do that. You can start with your key metrics and kind of derive those in a piecemeal basis, and then improve and iterate as you go. So you're done with planning. That took a while. I promise everything else will go real quick from now on. Here's the validation stage. We think of this in two phases. First, just do everything wherever everything exists today. Don't worry too hard about what tool you're using. Get the numbers and the definitions that you've aligned with your stakeholders, and just make it work, make that number run. You'd be surprised at the number of metrics that are currently being used that have gotchas you discovered in planning phases that did not mirror that in your calculations. This is a good time to iron all of that out and get real good numbers. When you're done with that, bring it into whatever dashboarding tool you do and you have. And in this example, this is the exact same dashboard we showed you in the beginning, which was our end product. Why did I do that? It's not because I didn't prep another key visual. It's because we actually just made that dashboard originally with no semantic layer work whatsoever. As long as the numbers are functioning, you've already gotten at stage 2 to a functioning, usable asset for your business. So you've done the pre-workout. You've done the base work to validate those things. And you can now ship that as a partial ship and get your team up and running. If you stop here, you're going to lose a lot of the benefits I'll talk about in 3-ish minutes. So stay tuned. There's a reason why step 3 and 4 exist. So on to step 3. This is the build part. This is the part that everyone expects to be the longest. It's going to be the shortest. There's going to be 3 phases. And think of this more as build phases or build themes than it is an architectural diagram of how to build your semantic models. It really isn't. But there are going to be 3 key themes that you're going to act on today. First, you are definitely going to be adding net new models and metrics. That's just going to be part of the game. But number 2, this is what we, and this is why in the title it says can be in phases. Even we're going through this process right now. If you look at seat utilization as a metric, this table is built on this ginormous table with a bunch of joins. And this isn't a pattern we had to do as an evolution of BI tools and constraints of BI tools in the past. That's not something we have to do anymore in the future. So if your team finds the time to start refactoring and doing some of this work, there's a good time to do that. And it could be at that build phase, or you can even phase it out as another iteration. For us, we just plugged right into it. We have a bit of trade-offs by doing that, but we got quicker to time to value in that. So we'll rewind, and as a team, we're going to continue to unwind some of these constructs in the near future. And then the last, use this as a perfect opportunity to deprecate old and inconsistent logic of your metrics. This is a perfect example, 1-line code change, but it was just something where we had used, it's kind of hard to read, I'm sorry, but we had used the current active state of a customer's plan instead of their historical state when that action happened. Again, one of those things where when we validated, perfectly normal. That's how the metric was. But a couple weeks later, as we dug even deeper, we realized, we had the wrong assumption all this time. At some point, your numbers kind of drift. Made the change, quick 1-line change, still part of the build process. All of these can just happen in quick iteration, and they're all going to keep building onto it. And then the last, iterate and develop best practices. I said iterate way too many times in the past 10 seconds. Here's just a quick snippet. Feel free to take a QR code. Erica did a great job at converting our best practices doc, things that we've learned in the past 12 months, into that publicly accessible QR code. But here are just 2 quick highlights that I want to show everybody. The first is how we think about our naming structure and just like mental model of what a metric should look like or should be. We by no means think this is the end-all be-all, but at least it's one take and one stab at how this like complex project can be broken down. You'll see here where we convert essentially what is a human-readable description of what a metric looks like to what we think the actual metric naming spec should break down to. And we'll have both because dbt's semantic layer allows you to keep both your human-readable one and also your machine-readable or at least engineer-readable piece. The second one is on our folder structure. We think packing metrics in themes that the business looks at. For example, you'll look at seats, you'll look at users. These are thematic aggregations that don't mirror how your dbt models were constructed. But the semantic models, oops, wrong button. Semantic models below those are organized in the same structure that we have our marts organized, because we kind of piggyback off of our marts and then build into metrics and calculations after the fact. Again, this is just our stab at how we think implementing metrics might work in your organizations. But if you guys have other best practices, we'd love to hear and have those conversations. But this is important because everyone knows that there's no such thing as a my-perfect dbt model. We've spent 8 years trying to do that, where you do select star from my perfect model with everything. We have learned the hard way over 8 years of iteration that that's never going to be a thing. Things change too fast, and there's too much evolution. In the same way, don't treat semantic models as the same thing. There's never going to be a my perfect metric. But what we do instead is we put conventions and practices in place to make it easy to make these iterations and make it easy to build a good high-trust environment with our stakeholders, to know that when things change, there's a process and context around how these things come about. So what did we learn? If you skip step 1 and 2, you will not get any of these 5 key benefits that we discovered over the past 12 months. Number 1, it provides a workflow for building metrics with best practices front of mind. Once you try committing into your DBT projects, the same people that make it difficult for you to add any model into your DBT project will also make it a bit difficult for you to add semantic models. Not because they want your life to be difficult, but because we want to put standards in place and we want to do them well. So we can you and your data teams can work and try to find that middle balance. But at a baseline, you will be required to build on top of DBT models from day 1. You will have to have consistent naming, because if you try to name the same thing, you're going to run into a compile issue. You're going to have to put in documentation, because I'm hoping that everyone reviewing your PRs will make sure documentation is there. If not, they will give you a quick little nudge and say, please read the style guide. It told you to put documentation. See you in a day. And then the last is entity relationships should be well established. This becomes a byproduct of that entity management process, but also as you're required to start building out entities in your semantic layers with the semantic models, you will be forced to face this reality very quick. So again, this part becomes very easy if you do the planning stage and invest in that workflow. Second, incident handling. This is by far my favorite. Now that we finally have metrics as part of our DAG, before you create this gold standard model, you truly don't know how the gold standard model is being used across the board. But you do know that this metric is checked by your CEO every week. Or you do know that your EPD leadership is reviewing this every 2 weeks. And so you know if there's an incident, you can trace the DAG and look at what has broken. So in this case, if Fact Cloud user account activities, great long name, is broken, you'll know that seat utilization percentage is likely going to be impacted. This can be another input for you to decide what to prioritize in terms of incident resolution. The third, it forces compromises and coalescing, pun intended, of metric definitions. You're forced to come to the decision that something must be changed. In a distributed dashboard, kind of do what you want a la carte world, you often rarely have to face those head on or are less likely to be forced to face that head on. The fourth, it enables cross-tool interface and consistency. We use Hex in this example. But now, because you can pull that same semantic layer metric from anywhere in the world, we can connect with the best BI tool of all time, Google Sheets. Let's face it, we'll never get rid of Google Sheets. Let's just accept that we have to have it as part of our workflows. And then lastly, and again, these are just the things we've discovered in the past 12 months, it empowers data practitioners to onboard into different aspects of the business. If you gave everyone this left side of just the blue models, I wouldn't know where to start. Most people don't. But if you know there are key metrics that power certain parts of the business and you want to onboard someone new, you can start at the end of this and kind of work your way back and try to surmise. And it's not the perfect solution, but it's at least one step better than where we were a couple of months ago. So these are the base benefits. We're coming up on time. I'm passing it back to Rick to close us off.
All right, some evidence to say that we had some really great wins through this implementation. One is that we already had folks who are not on the data team make contributions to updating their metric, which has been wonderful, as well as finally having that alignment on seat utilization, which has been a contentious topic for a couple of years, months, and as also the data team has also seen the experience of, wow, I don't have to do all these crazy joins and do the state spining to accommodate this BI tool. And that also leads us to some closing remarks. If you were to be zoning out this entire time, let's zone back in for the last few minutes where we want to further collaboration. Knowledge and data shouldn't be a monopolized resource. It should be shared across your entire company. Those metrics are really great starts. So bring in your data analysts, bring in your stakeholders. When they codify metrics, when they're involved in the conversations, they're more invested in understanding what the little pieces make up for the big metric at the end. As well as some positive unlearning. This is an evolution of existing workflows, so we no longer have to do all those crazy joins that Andrew had just showed us on our DAG. Really good self-report there. As well as this is a new frontier. So going back to the days in 2017, 2018, when DBT was really small, we had a lot of great contributions from the community. DBT wouldn't be the way it is today without all of y'all. And so let's explore this together. The Semantic Layer team, we give them a lot of feedback, but we're just one team. So please share your experiences, whether it is developing the Semantic Layer, whether it's trying to have buy-in with your stakeholders, share it, give that feedback, please, we encourage it, because we couldn't, have this great product without all of y'all. So let's explore it together. So thank you so much. Please catch us on DBT Slack. If you have any additional questions, we'll also be here for Coalesce. Our Slack names are just @Erica and @Andrew. So thank you so much, everybody.